Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to League Analysis. I'm Handygamer, and in this video series, I want to be taking a closer look into the draft between WE and Samsung in the second semifinal of this year's Worlds. Obviously, this is the first part of the series. Again, I will be going over the draft priorities that these two teams are having throughout the series, and just as a brief glance, I will also be taking a look again at the jungle draft factor. However, I will not go into as much detail as the topic deserves. So, if you're interested and haven't seen my video on the jungle trifecta, make sure to check it out. In general, I think there's a rock paper scissors kind of scenario going on at the current Worlds. You have obviously Sejuani being the most played jungler, doing pretty well against almost every other matchup because of her strengths, which is her being extremely tanky, building Warmocks, thus being able to reset any fight. She has both peeling potential as well as catch potential, so you can run her in almost every single team comp. And her only weakness is her rather weak early game. Thus, you see Jarvan obviously pulling ahead in terms of head-to-head record because he can actually abuse the early game. He can start snowballing the map because he can always pressure Sejuani in the jungle. However, he's playing, or if you choose him, you are playing a more or less all-in kind of playstyle. You want to dive the enemy backline, you want to have your team follow up, and this doesn't work out against Gragas because he can simply deny everything you try to do as Jarvan. Gragas has a decent early game. He won't be able to pressure Sejuani the way Jarvan does, but he won't get pressured by Jarvan the way Sejuani is. So the early game isn't really a strong point for Jarvan there, at least not as much as against Sejuani. And later on, if you come closer to like the 20-minute mark, when team fights are bound to be happening, Gragas is the one who can actually decide whether they take place or not in comparison to the Jarvan because he has this explosive barrel. His explosive cask, I think it's called. So yeah, Gragas, as we will see throughout this series, is just insane against Jarvan, and against Sejuani he doesn't do as much because Sejuani doesn't have to be there in person to lock down an enemy. She can just use her ultimate. Also, if in case she gets caught, unlike the Jarvan, she will be able to survive for a much longer time. So Gragas' kit isn't like as effective as it is against Jarvan. You see that he's doing pretty fine against almost every single other jungler other than Sejuani, having lost only 2 games where his opponent wasn't Sejuani. So yeah, he is probably, I think, the strongest pick right now in the jungle in terms of what he does in relation to what the teams want to be doing. But I will be discussing this in a separate video where I will be making my predictions in terms of draft for the World's Finals. So for SKT versus Samsung. So make sure to check that one out. In this video, obviously, we will be discussing WE versus Samsung, and now we are looking into the draft priorities at this stage. WE, despite them going for a different team composition in the first game, they tend to prefer all-in compositions. They pick their jungler rather early in the draft and adapt their playstyle around the jungle pick. And I think in terms of what they end up picking, for example, in the AD carry position, they are very flexible. They show a lot of variety in terms of top lane picks. So it comes down to what they end up picking in the jungle and how they want to play the game around said jungler. On the opposite side, Samsung in the first game don't really follow their 1-3-1 game plan that they show throughout the second half of the game. However, they always want to be able to choose their fights. They have a high priority on picks like the Janna or the Gragas, as we will see, also the Taric, because this allows them to pick whatever time they think the fight is right to actually go for fights. And With that in mind, let's take a closer look as to what kind of champions these teams will pick up if they are available. Obviously, Xayah Rakan as a bot lane is insanely strong right now, and throughout the first semifinal, we saw RNG actually trying to block SKT from picking it up almost every single time without actually them going for it themselves. Now, WE, as we will see throughout the first game, will actually be able to pick up the combination. They obviously want to go for that. If they don't get it, they have a high priority on the Taric because, well, if you're going all in and the enemy team is unable to respond for the duration of the Cosmic Radiance, you are in a very strong position in terms of your fighting power. And obviously, if you go for all-in compositions, you want to have Jarvan as your jungler. So if they manage to pick up the Jarvan, they go for the all-in compositions. If they don't, they don't. And on the opposite side, Samsung also have a high priority on Taric. We actually will be seeing Taric picked on the red side every single draft. So both teams picking him up twice shows this is a very strong and contested pick among them. Again, previous to the first game, discussing Varus doesn't really make much sense, but after the first game rolls out and we start looking into the second game, the Varus will come into effect. Same as the Gragas and the Gnar. But in terms of bans, we actually see quite a lot of bans already taking effect in the first game. Obviously, Sejuani will be 100% banned by World Elite, which leaves 2/3 of the jungle trifecta open. And that's actually something that we will be seeing throughout the first games of the series, the matchup between Jarvan and Gragas. Then you also have the Galio that World Elite tend to ban away if they are on the blue side and have a ban available, as well as the Gnar and the Kha'Zix. I didn't put up the Gnar because the Jace has a higher priority for WE, and I also see the Jace as a priority a ban for Samsung, and I wanted to discuss the Jace more than I wanted to discuss the Gnar, which we already have as a pick for Samsung, because in the matchup between 957 and Cuvée, the Jace isn't only a strong pick for one side, as we saw it in the previous series, where RNG banned it away against Huni every single game, but apparently both can play it here in this series, so Jace will see bans from both teams. And we also have to consider the Kha'Zix ban. Obviously, this is targeted straight at Ambition. No other jungler has been playing the Kha'Zix in this Worlds, or at least none that I remember. And I think WE, they only use this as a red side ban, by the way, during their second rotation if Samsung haven't been locking in their jungler beforehand. Samsung don't have a high priority on their jungler in terms of the draft, so I think those two combined make for that Kha'Zix pick. I disagree with the Kha'Zix pick. I think you should leave it open at least once to see if Samsung actually want to go for it. If they do, and if they win the game, well, too bad, but you started the series 1-0 up. I think you can afford going for that risk in the second draft, and later on can adapt accordingly if they actually go for the Kha'Zix. That is because obviously Ambition has been playing other champions as well. On the opposite side, Samsung have a high priority in terms of bans onto the bot side. They go for Janna every single game they are on the red side, and that's because Lulu is banned by WE every time they are on the blue side, but Samsung also ban it if they are blue side, so Lulu will also be 100% banned throughout the entire series. Then we have the Kog'Maw that Samsung end up banning quite a lot against WE. And also Xayah Rakan after the first game won't be allowed through for WE. So Samsung, I think, show that they don't want to play it themselves, but they want to take it away from WE. So I think if you are looking at the finals, you might expect one of these two being permanently banned by Samsung, simply because they don't really feel like executing it. And SKT has received bans by RNG, so I think at least RNG was thinking that SKT might run it. So yeah, that's already prediction for the finals here. But now let's take a look at what those two teams actually ended up drafting throughout the first game. Obviously, I chose again a screenshot where the players haven't switched, so you can see the order as well. In terms of draft, you can see that WE stick to what I already discussed, banning away the Sejuani, Galio, and Lulu as blue side. Again, on the opposite side, no real surprise in terms of bans either. As I said, if Samsung is red side, they will ban away the Janna, else they would ban away the Lulu. They also ban away the Kog'Maw as red side in this case, and you always have to ban Kalista. So no surprise there. Team WE show they want to play the Rakan as a support. They consider him to have higher priority than the Xayah for them, so they lock that one in first. Samsung go for the Jarvan in this case. Obviously, he has had a very strong performance throughout Worlds. He has had an even stronger performance prior to the semifinals, and thus I think it's okay to go for the Jarvan here if you ignore everything that I discussed in the Jungle Trifecta video. And you can also lock in the Tristana here. Again, I think one of the most picked champions, pretty strong in terms of what she can do, both throughout the laning phase and later on in the game. Has clear speed, can jump in the wave, has high turret taking potential, has high damage threat late game, has high disengage. There are almost no real downsides to her, just that there are champions that can do certain aspects of her of what she can do much better than she does. But if you want to go for a flexible, versatile pick early on in the draft, and I think that's what you do given the current game state, you end up with a Tristana, same as you would go for the Sejuani in the jungle if she was available. On the opposite side, however, WE complete the Xayah Rakan bot lane and go for the Gragas. I think these two are the strongest picks available at this point in the draft. Xayah Rakan is just an insanely broken bot side, and the Gragas is just a hard counter to the Jarvan. So yeah, well played to WE at this point. And I think the Taric for Samsung doesn't really make that much of a difference. However, looking at the remainder of Samsung's draft, I think the Taric does make a lot of sense. Again, as I mentioned with Uzi, you can use Tristana's Rocket Jump and the Dazzle combination for lockdown on an enemy carry. If you want to go for aggressive plays in the laning phase, you can use it to set up a gank. It's a pretty strong combination. You also have the Cosmic Radiance to protect Tristana once she gets dove, while she, for example, doesn't have her rocket jump up or whatever. So yeah, I agree with that. It's also an Ardent Sensor abuser, so yay, Ardent Sensor meta. Now, I'd say that after the first part of the draft, obviously, at least from my perspective, WE come out ahead. As I mentioned, one of the strongest bot lanes that are currently available in the game. They counterpick the jungler. So yeah, that's that. Now let's take a look at the bans. Obviously, Cho'Gath is one of the most banned top laners currently. I think you saw it 100% banned by Samsung, by SKT against RNG. Samsung will continue this trend of banning away the Cho'Gath. And they also ban away the Jace, which is just a red side ban at this throughout this series. And I think it really comes down to opening up the Gnar as a first pick on the red side, because it's a top laner that can play into almost everything except for the Jace. And that's why we see the Gnar banned by the blue side team. That's also, I think, a reoccurring trend for WE. They want to take away the Gnar as a potential counter pick, or blind pick, and thus ban it away. I think that's a similar reasoning to why they ban away the Orianna, but I disagree with the Orianna pick because she hasn't really been played that often throughout this Worlds. However, I can understand that WE want to ban it away because they've had to play against Jensen's Orianna, I think 3 games in their quarterfinal, and he was performing pretty decently on it all the time, every single game. However, I think except for Cloud9, there's no team that has shown any real preference for the Orianna, so I think this is a wasted ban in this series. Nonetheless, you see Taliyah locked in for Crown. Crown has had some amazing performances on the Taliyah against Longzhu, so that shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. I think it's a pretty strong blind pick as well, simply because of Crown's potential on that champion. But WE react accordingly. They pick up the Shen as a split pusher. If you take away the Gnar and the Cho'Gath and the Jace, there aren't that many strong matchups that could counter the Shen left available. So going for that, I think, is the correct choice here, simply because you can now use the Gragas that you already have for a 1-3-1 kind of play style. With the Gragas, you can always disengage when Jordan is trying to look for a pick. And even if he gets his burst damage through Shen's Stand United, will help your AD carries survive through it. And also you have, with Xayah, someone who can simply dodge the damage coming out of the Cataclysm from Ambition. So your carry should be doing fine. Your top laner now can match the roaming potential of Taliyah with his ultimate. And with Kassadin for Xie in the mid lane, you now also have another strong side lane threat. You just have to get him through the early stages of the game, especially after the time that she picked up both his tier and his catalyst. I think he's pretty weak at this point. If he goes for the tier, I don't remember the actual build, but I think you have to just get Cassian through the laning phase as soon as he's able to sit on a lane on his own, even if it's just freezing the lane in front of his own inner turret. He will be getting a decent way into the game, and I think he should be able to deal with the Taliyah because he can just choose whenever he feels like he should be engaging. You also have the Stand United from Shen to allow for potential side lane engagements. And for Samsung, they are now kind of trapped in a scenario where they see that WE have a very strong 1-3-1 combination. They have drafted themselves a team that wants to look for fights, but they also want to have enough pressure on the top side, and I think that's why they choose the Ken. QV obviously is more of an aggressive top laner, even though he has a very high big champion pool. So I don't think that the Ken is due to QV's limited champion pool. It's just the one laner that might actually present some pressure. However, I think that picking, for example, the Maokai and going more all in on that team fighting identity would have been a smarter choice, because Ken simply is lacking in terms of tankiness. You need to get both Protobelt and Zhonya's for him to actually participate in a meaningful way in a fight, and even if you get those 2 items, his damage is severely lacking, so you need 3 items on him to actually be relevant in a game. And if you're facing a Shen as a top laner, there are more than enough chances that the team with the Shen will already have snowballed too much throughout their macro game. And I think given that we are in the semifinal of Worlds, both teams should be having enough of an understanding of the macro game that they will actually utilize the Shen to high effect. So to conclude, what do I think about the draft of each of these teams? I think WE have drafted themselves a very strong composition that can choose to pick fights whenever they favor their team. They have the Gragas with the Flash Body Slam to go for engages. They have the Kassadin to go for pickoffs on low health carries or simply members out of position. They have the Shen as a backup in case something goes wrong, or to supplement, say, for example, Kassadin going aggressive and then using his Zhonyas to dodge the aggro and allow Shen to ride in. You also have the Rakan as both a disengage and an engagement tool. You can use his ultimate both to catch someone or simply to drag the enemies away from your team and then return and dash to your own allies. You have the Xayah, who is pretty safe in terms of a pick. She has her ultimate to dodge away any single spell that might threaten her too much. She also can peel for herself with her feathers after using the Feather Storm. So she's also pretty fine in terms of both catching someone out of position using her feathers as a follow-up CC and being a safe AD carry in a 1-3-1 setting. So WE have drafted well-rounded team composition with a lot of strengths, a lot of potential win conditions, also a lot of objective taking potential simply because you can use the Gragas explosive cask to deny any potential commitment coming out of ambition, simply knocking him aside. You also have the Rakan for interrupting any potential steals. So yeah, WE insanely strong team composition. The only weakness is if Kassadin doesn't find a way into the game, then their 1-3-1 kind of crumbles. So they will have to make sure that Kassadin is doing fine in the mid lane. On the opposite side, you have Samsung, who are running a very strong or very focused engage composition. They are obviously looking for teleport flanks with the Ken using his Slicing Maelstrom to lock down enemy targets and follow up with a slam dunk of the Cataclysm. However, they only have means of locking down targets, not that much of actually having high AoE damage. So, for example, the equalizer that you might see out of Rumble or the AoE CC that Gallia would offer in addition to the Jarvan are missing in their team composition. They have to play around certain cooldowns much more than they would normally have in a different setting. Obviously, they can use the Talia wall both for macro plays and for locking down enemy targets, but they can't really do anything if the Cosmic Radiance is on cooldown or if the teleport for Cannon is on cooldown. Because if the Cannon can't enter a fight, there's not enough lockdown with the Jarvan ultimate alone to actually force WE to fight. Obviously, if they get a slam dunk onto the Xayah, then they might actually try to pressure, but they don't have enough follow-up for the Jarvan. There's no one diving in with him. So Gragas can simply use his explosive cask to deny anyone trying to walk towards the Cataclysm, and then Jarvan will simply die by himself. The only thing preventing that from happening is the Cosmic Radiance. If you have the Cosmic Radiance on cooldown, you cannot fight as Samsung. So you're drafting a team composition with very high potential, but very hard to, execution, and you have to play around very specific timing windows, which makes it very hard to actually execute this team composition properly. And thus, simply because I favor team compositions that have clear win conditions and that are easier to execute, I would say Team WE definitely came out ahead of this draft and are looking pretty strong coming into this game. Obviously, again, Samsung can pressure early on with the Ken, they can pressure early on with the Talia. If they get those two rolling, they can simply just win the game because WE doesn't have a split push threat, so their 1-3-1 kind of falls apart. So that's actually what Samsung I think should be looking for. That's it for my draft analysis of the very first draft in this semifinal. I tried to make it a bit shorter than the previous videos that I made about SKT and RNG. However, there was still a lot of things to discuss in this video, so thanks for watching. I'll obviously will be making a series out of this, so make sure to check out the rest if you're interested. And yeah, thanks for tuning in.